This is my baby. This is my reason for living. Without her, I can't breathe. I can't function.
Viewer discretion is advised for this educational documentary. Welcome back to Case Documentaries. I bring you true crime, disturbing stories and other things that you may later regret knowing, with regular uploads every week. Please do join the quickly growing Dark Case family by hitting subscribe now and turning on notifications. Thank you so much to all of my patrons. If your name is on the screen right now, then you're a legend. Let's get straight into today's Dark Case. Our love and respect goes out to those that knew and loved Nikki and all those affected by this case. Nikki Kuhnhausen was born on the 6th of July 2001. Youthful, vibrant and fiercely independent, Nikki lived her own life on her own terms. She made the choice to do what she wanted to do. Born Nikki Kuhnhausen, she had realised at the age of 6 that she was in fact a girl, even though she had been assigned the male gender at birth. Supported by her mother, Nikki simply became Nikki, and she went on about her life. Her reason for choosing the name Nikki? She wanted to be more like her idol Nicki Minaj, and it was also pretty similar to Nico. Her ultimate dream was to work for Nicki Minaj as a hair and makeup artist. In fact, she'd come up with a 15-step plan to land that very job. Nikki had every belief that she would do it, as did everyone else that knew her. Friends and family say Nikki had a strong sense of self from a young age, saying she was always just Nikki. Energetic, compassionate and always brimming with vitality, it seemed that Nikki was really going to go places. On Thursday the 6th of June 2019, it was a cold morning in Vancouver, Washington. Nikki had left a friend's house early to meet a man that she had met the night before. It was 6 AM and she hadn't even been to sleep yet. The two had hit it off and he had given her his jacket. They exchanged Snapchat usernames, and the two had spent the early part of the morning chatting on a platform back and forth. During the chat, they had agreed to meet. Maybe it was to return the jacket, maybe it was for romance, or maybe it could have even just been for a quick hookup. Whatever it was for, she didn't tell her friends where she was going, or when she would be back. This just wasn't in her nature. Nikki was fiercely independent, and no one thought anything of it. It was just Nikki going on an adventure. 4 days later though, no one had heard from her. Nikki's mother Lisa was beginning to worry. The two normally spoke every day or two, and it was strange not to have heard from her at all. Lisa checked in with Nikki's friends and ended up even more worried than she was before. They hadn't seen or heard from her either, not since she left on the morning of Thursday the 6th of June. This mother had a real reason to be worried. Nikki was only 17 years old. She was just a month shy of her 18th birthday. And no matter how outgoing, fearless and mature she may have seemed, Nikki was also a trans woman. In that year alone, there had already been 24 cases of trans people being killed in the US. Nikki was also a minor and a person who could sadly find herself the target of a hate crime. On June the 13th, Lisa reported Nikki's disappearance to the Vancouver police. The police began to piece together Nikki's movements. They knew that she had left her friend's apartment at around 6 AM, and that it was with a Russian man that she had met the night before. At this point, the police weren't particularly worried. Nikki was this free spirit and everyone expected her to just come home soon. Nikki had been using her friend's cell phone on the morning that she disappeared. The friend had been with Nikki the night before. She said it was her cell phone that had been used to talk with a man on Snapchat and set up the date. Detectives sent an emergency request for information to Snapchat. This was in order to reveal the chats that Nikki had engaged in the night before she disappeared, and early the next morning. The following day, an official search warrant was provided to the company, and the information was subsequently disclosed.
Yeah, this is 17-year-old Nikki Kuhnhausen, and family, friends, and investigators are all desperate to find her. They've passed out about 500 of these flyers, hoping someone can help.
It was now June the 27th, 22 days since any of her friends or family members had seen or made contact with Nikki. Now though, investigators had something to work with. Snapchat was able to recover the chat from that morning, and they divulged the contact information for the username of the person that she had been talking to. The man was David Bogdanov, a then 25-year-old contractor who had emigrated to the US many years before. He lived in Vancouver, as did all of his brothers, all of whom were tradesmen and contractors within the local area. Police were able to get warrants to track his phone's geolocation on the night and morning in question, and found that he had been at his brother Stan's house the evening before, and that he had been where Nikki had been staying the next morning. So finally, the police had a person of interest, someone who could hopefully provide them with some idea of where Nikki may be. But instead, they quickly hit a brick wall. When the police attempted to interview David the very next day, he had already left the country. In the time between Nikki's disappearance and the discovery of the Snapchat texts, David Bogdanov had bought a one-way ticket to Ukraine. He wasn't just a little hard to find, he was half the world away, apparently visiting his family there. Perhaps all this was just a strange coincidence and nothing to be suspicious about. The next few months would crawl by with no information on Nikki's case. She hadn't come home and no one had come forward with any new information. The wait would have to continue until David returned home. And as soon as he did, detectives with the Vancouver Police Department brought him in for questioning. On October 2nd, 2019, David came in and was questioned about his encounter with Nikki. He was actually helpful and told the detectives that he'd been out drinking with his brother on the evening of the 5th of June. On their way home, they had seen Nikki walking alone, and then David talked his brother into pulling over so that they could talk with her. He said that she seemed upset, and that she was walking alone in the middle of the night in the middle of downtown. He chatted to her to see if she needed any help or a ride home, but Nikki said no. At one point, he gave her his jacket as it was cold out. This was along with his Snapchat username. Nikki didn't have a phone on her, so she remembered the name and the two parted ways. And then a few hours later, she added him on Snapchat and sent him a pin with her address. David then took his brother's van and picked her up. They talked for a while and then she left on her own, but she didn't tell him where she was going, and that, as far as he was concerned, was that. Another lead that just ran straight into a dead end.
This is my daughter. This is my baby. This is my reason for living. Without her, I can't breathe. I can't function.
That girl can do her makeup on fleek like there's no tomorrow.
None of her friends had heard from her, and then she missed her high school graduation.
She's being prevented from contacting me. She is being held in some situation where she cannot reach me because that's all she's trying to do right now. She's screaming for me, she's calling out my name, and I don't know where she is. And I can't get to her.
Frustratingly, Nikki didn't have her phone on her, and there was nothing to track her movements from that point onwards. The last traceable contact that Nikki had with anyone was with David, contact that he openly admitted to and then met up with her again the next day, only for Nikki to just seemingly disappear. There was nothing in David's history to make him an actual suspect. He had no criminal history as far as anyone could see. The investigation came to a halt, and life went on for the people in the Vancouver area. However, family and friends kept up their vigil. But sadly, Nikki's disappearance had moved from the front pages into relative obscurity, and then came a heart-stopping break in the case. On Saturday the 7th of December, a hiker was collecting bear grass on Larch Mountain, located in a remote part of northeast Clark County near to Vancouver. He was searching a brushy area at the bottom of a steep hill, and then something caught his eye. It was a skull. A human skull. They immediately contacted the local police, and a crime scene was established at the location. Forensic teams combed the area. The remains of other body parts were scattered around, seemingly from animal activity. The team recovered an almost complete human skeleton. A cell phone charging cord had been looped around the neck of the victim. A few strands of the victim's hair were still caught in the knot, among the debris of the forest floor. A few rings and other pieces of jewellery were also found, along with a brightly coloured jacket. The clothing found on the site roughly matched what Nikki was thought to have been wearing. The jacket appeared identical to one that she posted on social media, but the police were cautious to jump to conclusions too quickly. While they waited for positive identification by the medical examiner's office, they looked back over the cell phone geolocation of David Bogdanov on the day of Nikki's disappearance. David visited this very scene on that very day, and then the DNA came back a match. The remains were sadly Nikki's. With the evidence in hand and positive identification of the remains, the police knew that they had their man. On December the 17th, David Bogdanov was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. At first, during the interrogation, he stuck with his original story.
David? Hey, how you doing? What's up, girl? I'm in spite of things. Got you some water here, so we're gonna take the handcuffs off you. All right. Do you understand that this room is being audio and video recorded? Sure. Okay.
They chatted, he gave her a coat, and then she went home. But then he met her again in the morning. He picked her up in his van, but when he realised she was transgender, he kicked her out of the van and sent her on her way.
For me, it's even disturbing when I'm around a gay person or somebody bi or transsexual or something, you know. So I just got disgusted and I asked her to just get out.
And then David claimed that he went to work. Simple. The detectives gave him a chance to revise his story, to put in anything about that day that he might have left out. However, the only amendment is that he may have stopped at a gas station, but otherwise stuck to his original story. The interrogator tells him that they knew he went somewhere right after the meeting, leading him to the idea that they knew where he went without telling him directly. And at that point, he was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, a crime in the state of Washington that could see a penalty of up to 20 years in prison.
So understand that you're being arrested today for the murder of Nikki Kuhnhausen, whose remains have been discovered. Okay. Who was strangled to death. Okay. So we're going to put you back in handcuffs. All right?
In August 2021, Bogdanov went to trial at the Clark County, Washington Superior Court. Unable to distance himself from the killing, his defense rested more on the explanation that the killing was not intentional, but that David was scared for his own life. It was a fight-or-flight situation, according to David. David concealed and carried a weapon, and warned Nikki as the two sat in the car. Nikki was in the back seat, but before he joined her, he removed his gun, wedging it between the center console and the driver's seat. He told the jury they chatted, which transitioned to making out, which then turned into Nikki giving him in the back seat of his car. As things progressed, David said he realized that Nikki wasn't a cisgender woman. He claims that he went into shock and the two began to fight. As they struggled, Nikki jumped up and went towards the center console, towards his gun. David said, "At this point, the overwhelming feeling and thought was like a fight or flight mode just kicks in. And all I can think is, oh my god, I'm going to get shot right now. This person's crazy." He then said that in the struggle, he reached for the first thing he could find to help him in the fight, namely a charging cable that was left on the center console between the seats.
And all I can think is, oh my god, I'm going to get shot right now.
Was it your intention to hurt Nikki?
Never.
Okay. So you believe that she would have killed you, no doubt?
Yes.
David continued, "I couldn't get a hold of her, couldn't stop her. And then in a passenger seat, the front passenger seat, in the rear pocket, was hanging out my phone cord, my charging cable. In the struggle, I grabbed that cable and put it around her so I could hold onto it."
I push her back, and you start freaking out, saying, "You need to tell me you're a dude." I grabbed that cable and put it around her and pull her back like that, and hold her from keep going forward.
She passed out, and I thought she just passed out. You know, like I've seen in TV and fighting sports. People get choked out. They just go to sleep for a little bit. He did not, however, explain why the cord had been knotted after it was put around Nikki's neck.
Was it your intention to hurt Nikki?
Never.
Okay. So you believe that she would have killed you, no doubt?
Yes.
The prosecution also didn't buy this excuse. Nikki was terrified of guns after being shot the year before during a robbery. Not only that, but the gun he said Nikki had attempted to grab was never even found, begging the question, did it even exist? And thankfully, the jury didn't buy the story either. They found him guilty of murder in the second degree. Because of the hate crime nature of the murder, he was also found guilty of malicious harassment. The defense had requested that the lowest sentence possible be handed down to Bogdanov. This was because he had no prior criminal history. However, the judge had other ideas.
David has taken so much from all of us, and I'm sure the defense is going to ask for compassion. And I ask you, how much compassion did he have for my beautiful baby girl? I beg of you in the court to give him the maximum penalty for the crimes he's been found guilty by a jury of his peers.
We, the jury, find the above-named defendant guilty of the crime of murder in the second degree.
Judge David Gregson sentenced him to 234 months for the second-degree murder charge and 12 months for the malicious harassment. David will spend over 20 years behind bars. This is more than the entirety of the life that Nikki got to live. Nikki's remains were cremated, and while there is no public gravesite to visit, her legacy has been honoured with the Nikki Kuhnhausen Act, a Washington state law that prevents the use of a trans panic defense. Do you think the punishment fits the crime here? What do you think could be done to avoid something like this happening again in the future? Please do let me know down in the comments. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.